Chapter 3. Madness. The door shut behind them, and the small, ordinary sound of it landed in Alaris's chest like something far larger closing, though he could not have said what. Then she turned and looked up at him with eyes full of fire, and he moved before he had decided to. His hands found her waist without asking his leave, his mouth found hers. Instinct and nothing else, for he had no skill to call on. She tasted of wine and madness, and he lingered there like a man who'd found water after a long, dry road. Alyssa made a small, surprised sound and answered, turning the chaste press of his mouth into a proper kiss. Her free hand fisted in his hair and dragged him closer. Her lips worked his, with an ease that pulled a low sound out of him, and she took the opening and licked into his mouth. The little startled hitch in him when she did was, she thought, indecently sweet. He had heard of kisses like this, the southern kiss, his less chaste friends had called it, and he'd always privately suspected they were lying about it being any good. It had sounded faintly disgusting. It was not. It set his heart hammering, and he gave it back as well as he was able until the want of air pried them apart. She had meant it for a simple thing, a night's warmth, nothing owed and nothing kept. It did not stay simple. He undid her, not with any skill he had, but with a tenderness she had not braced for. And when he breathed, "I'm yours, for as long as you'll keep me," against her skin, the words reached clean past every guard she owned. She should have run then. She did not. She wanted him. And as always, she let herself simply have what she wanted. But this time the cost was rather more than she had meant it to be herself. When it finally let them go, they settled together, Alyssa on the broad, warm plane of his chest, the covers drawn up over them both, spent, both of them, and losing the fight with sleep, and already the morning was leaning in to spoil it. Alaris lay making what peace he could with letting her go at dawn. Women who took strangers to bed were no ones to keep. A northern knight passing through on a king's errand was a night's amusement, and not a thing more. He had nothing to offer that might make her want to keep him. Nothing but himself, he thought with an ache. And that had never once been enough. Alyssa was losing a different fight entirely. She had been no one's to keep, true enough, no one's but her mates. The small voice she'd spent the whole evening refusing to hear had given up whispering and begun gleefully to crow, "You are in such trouble." She drained the goblet off the nightstand to drown it. Alaris was already going under, his arms locked warm around her. She let herself follow him down, content for this little while. Trouble could wait for the morning. Chapter 4. Market and Sky. Alaris woke to sunlight through the shutters, far too bright, and a mouth dry as a riverbed in drought. His head ached. So oddly did the curve of his neck. When he sat up, something rolled off the bed and clinked across the floorboards. A wine goblet. Empty. The other side of the bed was empty too, and cold. He had not expected otherwise. Still, the sight of it laid a small, dull weight under his ribs. He hauled himself to the wash basin and in the shaving mirror found a scatter of bruises and, he leaned in, the clear print of teeth along his shoulder and collarbone. "Well," he muttered, "she did say she might bite." He could not decide whether to feel triumphant, alarmed, or an absolute fool, and settled somewhere among the three on a rueful grin that died the moment he remembered why he was in this city at all. "She likely thinks me an idiot," he decided, dragging on a clean shirt. The thought had no right to sting. It stung anyway. Duty regardless. Hungover or not, he had a princess to lay eyes on. Outside, the air was crisp and busy, the mountain wind carrying bread and forge smoke through the narrow streets. He kept his hood low and his cloak close, and made for the great market square the whole tavern had talked of the night before. It was vast. Colour and noise spread like a tapestry across the open heart of the city. Merchants cried silks and wines and spices and jewels, all under the eye of well-fed guards. Nobles drifted between the stalls, and even the beggars looked better fed than the poor he was used to seeing. It was not, in short, the sort of place one came to find a captive princess. He circled, pretending to browse, until the town hall bell finished telling noon and the crowd parted for a light, elegant carriage, lacquered dark green and silver, ringed with guards. 3 women rode in it. One of them was, beyond any doubt, Princess Anlena. Something in his chest unclenched. She was alive. More than alive, radiant, in silks the colour of sunrise, her hair loose and shining, leaning to laugh over a bolt of cloth with the women beside her. She looked healthy. She looked happy. She looked, in plain fact, far too happy for a woman who was meant to be a prisoner, and the wrongness of it sat him back on his heels. Then he looked properly at the woman a step behind her, and his breath caught for an entirely different reason. It was her. Elissa Fiery. The wild hair bound back into a braid that had not entirely surrendered to the comb, the green cloak traded for fine travel leathers, faint shadows under her eyes, and every inch of her standing the way a bodyguard stands, or an assassin, or some creature in between. He found himself remembering with treacherous warmth her teeth at his shoulder. Saints, he thought. She was real then, not a drunkard's fancy. He followed at a distance, threading the crowd. Anlena moved like a woman wholly at her ease, sampling candied fruit, lifting a length of silk, laughing over a merchant's haggling. Nothing in her looked coerced, and that frightened him more than chains would have. If the sorcerer had worked some enchantment on her, no sword in the world would cut her free of it. He was no magician. He would have to trust to opportunity and strength and, he sighed inwardly, luck. Elissa spoke with the princess easily, almost fondly, but her eyes never stopped moving over the crowd, sharp and watchful, and more than once, despite all his care, they found his and held a half-beat too long before sliding away. Each time it went through him like a struck bell. Protective, he thought, frowning. The sorcerer trusted his bride to her, which made the woman who had unmade him so easily the night before exactly the wall between him and his charge. The notion sat around his neck like a noose. By late afternoon, the baskets were full and the party withdrew to the carriage, the guards closing round, the procession winding back up toward the high city. Alaris stayed where he was, rooted, as her eyes met his one last time through the carriage window and then were carried off. The crowd flowed around him like a river round a post. She had not looked like a woman wanting rescue, and the other one, her name and her crooked half-smile circled in his head, and he could still feel her laughter warm against his skin. The longer he stood there, the more it seemed the only soul in this city in need of saving was him. He wandered the streets aimlessly until the light began to fail, then turned back toward the tavern, up the hill toward the northern wall. The wind had risen, banners cracked, awnings strained at their poles, and then the dusk above him went dark, eclipsed by something vast still gliding in the last of the sun. He looked up. For a heartbeat the world stopped. A creature so huge and so gleaming soared over the rooftops that he forgot to breathe, green as sunlit emerald, wings spanning half the square below, scales throwing off silver and gold as she banked. Magnificent. Terrible. Alive in a way no mortal thing was ever quite alive. The air shuddered with the beat of her wings. He could see the talons, the long jewelled rope of her tail uncurling in the wind as she passed directly overhead and blotted out the evening. And, to his horror, something deep in him called out to her, wordless and unbidden. Not fear, not awe. Something older and stranger than either, an ache that reached up out of his chest toward the shape in the sky. As she turned for the open plains beyond the walls, he could have sworn for one impossible instant that she was watching him, though her great head never turned his way at all. There was something in the way she flew, something graceful and deliberate and almost teasing, the very thing he had felt across a tavern table when a woman in green leaned close and made him an outrageous offer. He went rigid in the street. "No," he said under his breath, almost angry. "No, that's ridiculous." He turned down the last stretch toward the tavern with his head bowed against the wind, wanting food and wine and plenty of both. The dragon's shadow stayed in his mind long after the dragon was gone. It seemed in the days that followed that he had passed some test he had not known he was sitting. The wary looks were gone. The locals who had given him a wide berth now nodded over their ale and made room at their tables. Even the barkeep called him by name, with an odd undercurrent of something that, on a less weathered face, Alaris might have called pity. He smiled and drank with them, and laughed where laughter was wanted, and through every round his eyes kept drifting to the door, and every time it opened, his heart leapt, and then dropped when it was only some mason's wife or a late carter, and never her. He told himself he was being a fool. He went on doing it anyway. He had taken her at her word, that she was the princess's bodyguard. It fit her bearing, her daggers, the way the whole place bent toward her name. He toyed with the thought of asking her to carry word to Aunt Lena, and then with the thought that she might not love being asked to fetch and carry for a man she'd bedded, and was faintly amazed at himself for caring whether she minded. A woman like that, bold, sharp, untamed, was surely above such pettiness. Surely this was only her way with a new man. It had meant nothing. He had known the shape of the bargain going up those stairs. The denial did nothing for the hollow that opened in him when she did not come. He slept that week in snatches, waking often with the sense of having mislaid something vital, something that had never quite been his to lose. The days ran together. He learned the city the way a soldier learns ground. He may have to bleed on. The twist of the alleys, the watches changing hours, which gates were barred at dusk, which bridges would bear a man, and which asked him to take it on faith. A few well-placed coins bought him work as a market porter, good cover, and a fine place to gather rumour and watch the city breathe. In the evenings he came back to the Green Dragon, tired but never tired enough, and kept his vigil in the corner where she had first found him, an untouched goblet before him as though it might call her back. It did not. Now and again, in a crowded street or across the square, he caught, or thought he caught, a flicker of green, a glint of too bright hair, the curve of a smile. Once he was certain. She stood across the way with her eyes fixed on him, her face caught between sorrow and some fierce resolve. He took a single step toward her and she was gone, swallowed by the crowd as though she had never been more than a trick of the light. He could not put a name to what he felt. It was not love, not yet, but it had love's ache and love's pull, and he missed her laughter, and the strange brightness she had let into the dim corners of him, and the warmth of her skin he had no right to remember at all. It was not in him to miss things, least of all a woman. The whole sex had never held any power over him beyond the loyalty he bore his lady. This was something else, and it frightened him a little. By the end of the week his confusion had cooled and hardened into something colder and clearer. He had walked the sorcerer's castle himself, in a porter's apron with a delivery on his shoulder, and what he saw there killed the last of his hope for an easy thing. Double gates of iron and rune-cut stone, guards in armour that drank the light, wards shimmering faint as oil on water across every threshold. There would be no quiet rescue out of that place. 2 paths were left him and neither led anywhere good. The first was reason, to reach Aunt Lena herself, to call on the old friendship between them, and pray that if some spell held her, some fragment of the girl who had once flung river water at him might surface and break it. The second was force, to take her out of this city and out of whatever had its hand round her heart, whether she thanked him for it or not. A year ago, he would not have believed himself capable of the second, but something had shifted its weight in him since that night, since her. And the days had taken on a thin, bright edge of futility. Not quite despair, it carried despair's grimness, but under it ran something almost like relief, the quiet certainty that he might die here and be content to. He sat that night staring into the hearth and thought of the green dragon wheeling above the walls, vast, glittering, terrible, and breaking the heart beautiful, and found he did not greatly mind the idea of being ended by a thing like that. A foolish thought came to him unbidden, that if he fell here, his blood running into the cracks between the cobbles of this strange city, perhaps the woman in green and the great beast in the sky would both remember him. It seemed somehow better than being a toy set down and forgotten. He laughed at himself for it. Then, softly under his breath, he gave the week its only prayer. Let it be worth it. Chapter 5. The Dragon's Fall. The knight woke that morning to an empty bed and a sore neck, and told himself the matter was finished. The dragon had woken first, and knew better. Alyssa came up out of sleep into warmth, and the weight of another body tangled with hers, and for a long moment she did not move. She only listened, the slow, steady heartbeat under her cheek, the faint hitch in his breath as he dreamed. Her first feeling was joy, the unbidden kind, swift and bright as the spark before the flame. Her second was guilt. Her third was a bone-deep, almost bodily fear. It had been meant for a game, a little mischief to break the long sameness of nights in human skin, a scrap of warmth before another cold dawn. He had looked so hopelessly earnest, so out of place in a room full of easy laughter. She had meant to tease him, perhaps kiss him, perhaps drag him up the stairs for one night and remind herself what it was to feel alive. Nothing more. Lying on his chest now, she could no longer pretend that was all it had been. The whisper that had trailed her through the long centuries, that faint half-forgotten call she had taught herself not to hear, was a roar. It sang in her bones and her pulse and the very air, joy and lament braided into one note, and she felt it through his sleeping skin with every beat of his heart. The mate bond, the oldest magic her kind carried, wild and binding and without mercy. And her chance to refuse it had vanished the instant she kissed him back, for in matters of this magic, the kiss is the acceptance, and she had given it freely. He had woken it in her, and he, this mortal man who smiled like sun on water and carried duty in his spine and loneliness in his eyes, had no idea what he had done. To him, it would be a fond memory and a sore shoulder. To her, it was everything, an oath written in fire and blood, two fates fused for centuries past the brief span of his. She lifted her head and studied his face. Hair fallen across his brow, the old faded scar down his jaw, and, along his throat, her marks. Shallow crimson half-moons where her teeth had grazed the very edge of claiming. So close! The memory of it made her shiver. One more heartbeat and she would have bitten deeper and sealed the bond in blood, burning the two of them together forever. She had not. Somehow she had stopped. Because for all her selfish dragon's hunger, she would not have a reluctant mate, a man trapped by instinct or pity or ancient magic he could never hope to understand. A single night's warmth was one thing. Chaining him to her for lifetimes was another. And this was a man who loved his freedom. She could feel it in him the way she felt wind over open country. To take it from him would be a cruelty past forgiving. "Saints, save me from my own idiocy," she breathed, and the words came out more lost than angry. She untangled herself and slid from the bed and dressed in silence, cloak, daggers, one last look at the frowning sleeper, and slipped out. Cale was at the foot of the stairs, of course, his smirk far too knowing. "Rough night, Madame Fairy." She gave him a look fit to peel bark from a tree. "You've too much time for gossip, Cale. Shall I mention it to your wife?" He only grinned and stood aside. "Wouldn't dream of it, my lady, though the magistrate won't thank you if you've gone and broken another visiting knight. He isn't broken." She was halfway to the door before she added under her breath and only to herself, "Not yet." The morning air met her like a slap, cold and bright and full of the city, smoke and bread and iron. She braided her hair as she walked, found a clear place to take off without flattening anyone, and flew for her favourite mountain lake. A cold plunge and a clearer head were both badly wanted. The water gave her the first and made an honest attempt at the second. She reached the magistrate's manor near midday, hours past the dawn she'd been expected, hair half-tamed and cloak still creased. Inside she found Aunt Lena before a tall mirror in a haze of lavender and ink. Maids fussing over ribbons. The princess caught her reflection and arched a brow. "You're late." Am I? You are. Katarin wanted you. Something about the weather wards for the wedding. Then Aunt Lena turned and looked at her properly, and her smile sharpened. You're not usually this careless, or this rumpled. Rumpled? A delicate gesture. You have that look. What look? The one that says you've had a night worth losing sleep over. She let it sit, wicked and fond. You didn't kill him, I hope? Of course not, Alyssa said, scandalized. He's quite alive. A beat, even if perhaps regretfully so. You bit him. Lightly. A grimace. All right, perhaps not that lightly. Aunt Lena waved the maids out and waited for the door. And now you sit there pretending it was nothing when you look like lightning struck you. Twice. She turned to her wardrobe and began hunting out something Alyssa could be seen in. At the market, Katarin had refused to let her go without the dragon at her side, guard or no guard. It wasn't meant to mean anything, Alyssa said to the window. A night's distraction. Nothing. You sound almost afraid. I am a great many things, not afraid. Nervous, then, which from you is near enough. The princess set the borrowed riding clothes over the screen and tilted her head. Was he tall, sunburnt, fair-haired, far too serious for his own good, with a faded scar along the right of his jaw? Alyssa went very careful. How do you? Because I know him. Lips curving at the dawning look on Alyssa's face. Alaris of the Lakes. It's no great wonder my father sent him and no one else to fetch me home. The sly old fox knows that if any man alive could manage it, it's that one. The name rolled off her tongue with an ease that put an odd, jealous jab through Alyssa's chest. You have a past with the man? We were children together, a few summers in my uncle's house when I was small. She turned back to the mirror, her voice gone soft with it. He decided early it was his sworn purpose to keep me safe from the world, and took to it far too well. He once bloodied some page who'd said a slighting thing about me, never once thought to ask whether I wanted defending. So I slapped him for it in the middle of the great hall and told him to mind his actual duties and stop appointing himself my shield. She smiled, unrepentant. He stopped shadowing my every step after that. I suspect it broke his heart a little. He does strike me as the heartbreakable sort. Oh, he is, in his own hopeless, gallant way. Aunt Lena's grin turned outright. Once a court lady decided to test his virtue, crept into his chambers wearing nothing but perfume and confidence. He took one look at her, slammed the door and came straight to my room, would not leave until I'd gone, and made personally certain she was gone. Sat by my fire all night glaring at the wall, muttering about indecency corrupting the kingdom. Alyssa laughed low and rich despite everything. The princess's own laughter faded to something gentler. It's not a bad thing, Liz, hard as it is to picture, that you got that old stick in the mud to live a little. But he's good. Honest to a fault. Loyal even when it costs him. That kind doesn't bend easily. Be careful you don't break him. Alyssa looked out at the rooftops. That, she said quietly, is exactly what I am trying not to do, and knew deep down that one of them would have to break now before this bond would let the other go. The market, after that, was an hour of quiet torment. The princess was all silk and easy chatter. Alyssa walked at her shoulder with the bond humming under her skin, like a plucked wire, sharper out here in the open air than it had been behind Katarin's walls. She felt him before she saw him, a tug low and certain that drew her eyes to a fair head and a too straight back at the edge of the crowd, watching the princess, playing the hero still. Oh, you fool, she thought, half fond and half afraid. For one held breath their eyes met across the square, and the world thinned to nothing, and then Aunt Lena, following her stare, murmured, "So he really came." Airy and a little pink about the cheeks, and steered them both off toward the spice merchants as though the man did not exist. Alyssa let herself be steered, and said nothing, and carried that strange, double-edged jealousy home in her chest. While the knight kept his vigil in the common room below, the corner, the untouched cup, the door, the dragon kept her own, higher up and harder. The week passed for her in fragments. Duty, silence, and the bond she could not quiet. The mornings were worst. Its pull was always strongest at dawn, calling her down toward the lower city before she was fully awake. She fought it with motion. She trained the watch until her palms split, flew the ridges until her wings burned, buried herself in paperwork after, anything to keep her hands full and her mind off the markets, where a certain northern fool was playing at being a common labourer. She saw him, of course. Oftener than she wished. Across a crowded street, once by the river with his sleeves shoved up, heaving cargo off a barge as if he'd done it all his life. Each time the bond leapt like a struck chord and filled her with a warmth so sudden it frightened her. Each time she turned away before he could catch her at it. It was cowardice, and she knew it. But the cowardice was easier than the other thing, than facing what the bond meant and what it would cost. Katarin found her that evening in the Hall of Winds, frowning over a map she wasn't reading. He looked every inch the ruler he'd grown into, tall, dark, the faint shimmer of weatherlight tracing his skin where the power never wholly slept, until he smiled and the half-drowned boy she'd hauled out of the wastes flickered through. "You've glared at that same river 3 times now," he said mildly. "Planning to drown someone in it, or merely distracted?" She huffed and rolled the map. "Neither. Tired." "Tired," she says. He leaned against the table, arms folded. "You've flown every dawn this week and run my guards half to death. What are you fleeing?" She gave him the long-suffering look only old friends are allowed. "You question me like a wayward child." "Warranted when you lie so badly." His eyes softened. "Is it the bond?" She froze. "You can tell? I can feel it." He tapped his temple. "The weather turns when your heart does. You're the one who holds my storm at bay, remember? When you brood, the wind takes note. Don't make poetry of it. It's bad enough as it stands." "Who is he?" "No one." Too fast, too sharp, a lie born of the fear that this protective man would go and do something rash on her behalf. Katarin said nothing for a while, only crossed to the window and looked out over the dusk-silvered roofs. "You always told me dragons can't lie," he murmured. "Seems you've learned." "I'm not lying, only postponing honesty." "That's the word us mortals use for lying, you know." She smiled despite herself. "Since when are you mortal?" "Since I started collecting the taxes." They stood a while in the easy quiet of people who'd long since stopped needing words to fill it. Then he spoke again, softly. "You'll have to choose one way or the other. The bond won't fade. That magic is as old as your kind. It doesn't simply go." "I know, that's what frightens me." He turned to her, gentler than any sermon. "When I found you, we were both half dead and snarling at the world. One of us all power and no control, the other robbed of hers entirely. You taught me to master mine and to stop fearing what I couldn't command. Let me hand the lesson back. Don't fear what's yours." She looked at him truly then, and the old days rose unbidden, the abandoned prince raging down storms he couldn't stop, the chained dragon locked out of her own shape, 2 broken things finding a reason to live again, together. "Katarin, if I lose myself—" "You won't. He'd be abominably stupid to refuse you." Her throat tightened. "But if I do, promise you won't leave me to suffer it. Promise you'll do it yourself. I'll pass the binding to your wife." His face went serious. "I promise." Then he managed a crooked grin. "But if that brat's still breathing and he refuses you, I'll make him do it himself. I'm not a nice man." She laughed, really laughed this time, the tension breaking like a wave on rock. Later, when night had come down full and the city lights swam below, she stood on the parapet outside her chamber with the moon hung white over the peaks. The bond pulsed faintly. Not cruel, not kind, only there. A tether glowing soft and green in her chest. She leaned on the cold stone and said to no one, "He's drinking himself to sleep again, I expect." The wind stirred, soft as a laugh. She hesitated a moment longer, then let the change take her. Scales rippled up where skin had been, bone stretched and recast, and her wings tore clean through the sleeves of the borrowed shirt, as they always did. She had never mastered the finicky control the shift wanted to spare them. Her arms became wing and taloned forepaw both, and the cloth paid for it, the way it always paid. The emerald dragon threw herself off the battlement and carved up through the cloud. She flew hard and fast past the watchtowers and the outer walls until the plains opened beneath her like dark water. And there, far from any human ear, she loosed a long, wordless cry, a longing-made sound. It rolled out over the mountains, and somewhere in the city below, a drunk man asleep in a tavern bed dreamed of flying.